Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and welcome to the review, finally, of the SVS Ultra Towers. I've had these speakers for close to about 10 months now, far longer than I intended to be completely honest with you. And part of the reason why the review has been so delayed is because I felt like I just kept learning new things about music, learning new things about audio, and learning new things about the speakers. This has taught me about value. It's taught me about clarity. It has taught me about coloration and music and when it's a good thing and when it's a bad thing. And it has also taught me what most other speakers lack. So this review has become a long-term review. And just so you guys know, at the end of this, I'm going to give this my highest possible recommendation. This speaker is an incredible speaker, and I'm not just saying that. I am putting my money where my mouth is. And as of recording this video, I have a pending offer to purchase these speakers to SVS. So this is gonna be kind of a longer video. If you wanna skip to the build, you can skip here. If you wanna skip to the sound, you can skip here. And if you wanna skip to my final thoughts, you can skip here. I owe the engineers of this speaker a beer because this thing is made incredibly well. There is a piano gloss finish on it, which I am not really a fan of gloss, not really a fan of the piano black look either. However, on this speaker, I think it looks incredible. The only other color that I would have preferred is probably piano gloss white, which they make for the SVS Ultra bookshelves, but they do not for the Ultra Towers. Otherwise, I'd be buying those. But these things, outside of just the finish, are incredibly well built. They're like 75 pounds a piece. The cabinet is rigid and practically inert. I mean, you could put a glass of water on here and play it at, reasonable listening volumes. And there's very, very little vibration. It's actually pretty impressive. On the bottom, there are dual 8-inch woofers firing out to the sides. And there are dual 6.5-inch I think they call it glass fiber drivers, and then the tweeter is an aluminum dome tweeter. Now on the back, there's a big giant port, and then you have your binding posts, which can be by wire or by amped. So about the sound, I do have a couple of thoughts that don't really fit into particular categories that I do want to talk about. The first of which is a potential downside, which is going to be that these are not going to work very well in small or small medium rooms. If you are in a tight space, these are going to be way too bassy for you. And they also do a little bit better at a bit of a distance for the mid-range in the treble response. So they don't like to be right on top of you, and they definitely don't like to be confined to a small space. So if you got a small, tight room, I would not recommend these. I would perhaps recommend their bookshelves instead, and maybe a small subwoofer. So some benefits of the sound is the driver blend, or the cohesive nature of all the different drivers and how they play well together and how they legitimately blend. Like when it needs to be large scale and you need big bass and small little points of treble, obviously it can do that. But when you also need like a cello to come from a specific place, but you need all those high tones and mid tones and low tones to all come from kind of a finite area, this can also do that. And an instrument like that is going to have a pretty wide dynamic range in all those categories, and being able to blend everything together when needed, but also separate when needed, is a pretty incredible task to accomplish. And it's not easy to do. Another thing here is detail retrieval. So with most lower end speakers, what you'll see in the detailed department, like ELAC UB5s, is the presentation of that detail with a good treble response. And a good treble response should not be underestimated. And these do have good treble response, but a lot of those lower end speakers will achieve details through the treble response. That's where the most amount of information kind of shows up. Now with this speaker, while it has all of the information in those areas that you would want, it also carries a lot of information, and is really just about information packing. It carries packets of information in the mid-range and the bass response as well. So just hearing bass, you can tell the difference between two cellos. Just the slightly different timbre characteristics of each instrument, you can tell just by bass, or just by mid-range, or just by treble. And that is really cool to see. And so you get this highly detailed response that I would actually normally reserve that level of detail for something like a good planar or a good headphone. It's gonna have this rich detail, this rich timbre specificity in more than just the treble response. Not too many speakers can do that, but these can. Okay, and then last thoughts before we get into the more frequency-based stuff is going to be the fact that this speaker feels a bit like cheating. Now, what do I mean by that? I think this might even be a slightly inaccurate description of the company, but SVS is known for a home theater system. And I think this might scare away some audiophiles from their speakers, thinking that they do not have an audiophile appeal. And that could not be further from the truth. This is one of the best listening experiences for music I have had, period. The sound is amazingly full and complete, and it's not gonna be some typical home theater V-shaped mess like we see so many times before. Now, the reason why I say this feels like cheating is because of its home theater roots. It is very easy to drive, and while it does scale with nicer equipment is not needed. One of my amplifiers here is sort of a vintage Rotel Class AB amplifier. And it's not the highest fidelity thing or the most powerful thing in the world. And it was like $100 and something bucks on eBay. It wasn't expensive. And yet with this speaker, it sounds phenomenal. Now, let's say you're working with like a $2,200 budget, right? This speaker for 2,000 bucks plus $100 to a $200 used amplifier is gonna yield better results than most $1,000 speakers with $1,000 amps behind them. And because of its ease of use, it's gonna work well with either cheap amplification or things that are not all that powerful like receivers. But good amps are always gonna be recommended here.
Making moves, trying to get away from this life I'm living. Same old things every day.
So starting with the treble response here, it is lively, but it's got personality to it. It really does. It's got all the typical things that you would expect from a good treble response. So it's got consistency, it's got timbre, it's got the right amount of forwardness without being too harsh, and it's got a good amount of resolve. So it's got all those base level things. But then you notice what separates this speaker from a lot of others, which is gonna be the bravado and the ambience of the treble response. So the bravado is this speaker's very cool ability to have some of the most confident footing in any song, any situation that I've heard to date. This speaker literally never gets lost in the music. You can put on something with hundreds of musicians all playing at the same time, and everything feels distinctly placed. It feels distinctly separated. And it can do that dexterous sort of playing, or it can do singular instruments. If you just want to play a guitar or a piano, or just have a vocalist going a cappella or something like that, it can do all of it, but then it can also do the grandstand stuff and just resolving all the way through, clear all the way through, separated all the way through. Now the ambience is the feeling of neutrality without being clinical or sterile sounding. Sometimes speakers sound very clear, but they have this kind of tinny, lifeless kind of sound to it where it just sounds like raw information. This has the information side, but it also has a bit of coloration to it, but also open and airy and kind of uncaged. The best way I can describe it is that it feels precise, but not like confined. Now, last note on the treble response is that this is still a truth-telling speaker, right? This is where that more audiophile appeal comes from, for me at least, and why this isn't really what I would typically classify as a home theater speaker. What I mean by this is that if you are putting in, harsh, not very well processed music, or putting in like an old movie that doesn't have the best audio processing ever, this isn't gonna sound all that great. It's gonna kind of tell you the truth behind what's going on, and it's not gonna make bad stuff sound appealing. Now on the flip side of this, something like a Bucar S400, which is like a $2,000 bookshelf, is gonna take even the worst recorded music, and it's still gonna sound pretty good going out the front end. This is not the same way. This is gonna be shit in, shit out, good in, great out. So while I'm not gonna tell you what to listen to, I would recommend that you listen to really well-produced music on this, though there is a lot of wiggle room before you get like really bad recordings. I'm just talking about stuff that's like real old school rock that was like recorded in someone's basement, that type of stuff, you're really going to be able to notice that it was not made in a good environment. So the mid-range response is just about right for me. It's got this good mix of not being too forward nor pulled back. So the UB5s are going to be a speaker that is very good for mid-range, but it's always got this really forward, sprightly presentation. It's always kind of in your face, doesn't really have any chill. And then again, to mention those S400s, those are pulled back, right? Those are always going to be warmer. They're always going to be a bit more soundstagey and kind of pushed back into, pushed a bit deeper in the soundstage. You can't really escape that with that speaker either. You can't get them to be more forward. But the SVS towers have a good mix of both. So they can throw it back depending on what the song can do, and then they can push it forward depending on what the song can do. So if you get a really forward song like To Be Human from Marina, it's going to be able to present that in a very, not necessarily aggressive, but, confident manner. And then if you get something more soundstagey like Cecile McLaurin Salvant, you're getting To Be a Habit With Me, that's a bit more in the staging, and it can pull that off as well. So it's pretty dexterous, but not to the extremes of either. It's kind of just this nice little mid-range performance. It is slightly warmer, but not so warm that you're getting a little bit of a loss in detail. Now for individual songs, I think I might prefer X or Y speaker, just depending on that specific song. But I think this is one of the better examples of mid-range as an overall category that I've heard. Now, I don't have any measurements to back this up, unfortunately. I did see some reviews of the bookshelf version of the SVS Ultras, and those do have a little bit of a dip in the upper mid-range right around the female vocalist end. This seems to have a hair of a dip, but I don't think it's as aggressive as the bookshelves. This might be due to the MTM setup rather than just the standard two-way that's on the bookshelf. But I found this to be very complete for both male and female vocalists. But for the best vocal performance, I would highly recommend towing these in towards you. Now it is a little bit of a hit in the soundstage for that, but you really get to lock in a really impressive vocal performance. So it's quite nice. Well, this is a pretty tall speaker, and I would normally sit quite a bit lower than I am right now when I'm listening to these in the front room. My ear is not at the tweeter level. The tweeter is actually fairly low despite this being a taller speaker. My ear is right about even with the middle of the top driver. So I'm not getting exact treble performance. I have dipped my head down in the testing of this a few times, but the vocals lock more and more in, the more you can get the tweeter kind of directly hitting your ear at the right height. Though the slight off-axis performance is definitely not bad. So it's amazing what 32 inches of fast moving bass driver can do. The bass here is exceptional, and I actually can compare it to other speakers because it doesn't really sound like most of the other speakers that I've heard. I'm not sure if this is just the raw amount of woofer area that's actually moving on these speakers because it's dual 8 inches per side, or if it's the orientation, or if it's the fact that SVS is just this good at making subs. But what I would actually compare this to is a really good planar headphone. So the bass response on a good planar headphone is going to be fast, it's going to be lightweight, but still punchy and rich and thorough. And I would normally not use the word resolving for bass response, but this bass response is resolving. So I'm gonna go off on a slight tangent about bass response here on speakers. So these speakers, right? They can produce bass. They are good at it. They are not a 2020 speaker. They will go up to 20,000 hertz, but they do not hit 20 hertz on the low end. And it drives me crazy when I see reviewers talking about X or Y bookshelf being full range. Full range at the seating position is so hard to do, especially if you want to hit it on like a flat line from 20 to 20. It's incredibly hard to do. This speaker will go down to about 35 hertz pretty flat, and then it'll drop off quite swiftly after that. It'll hit about high 20s, but it's notably lower than about 35. 35 is where the line kind of starts to flatten out up into the other upper ranges. Now to translate this into usable information for you, 35 Hertz is very, very, very low. 35 Hertz at the seating position, that is. That's really good performance. So a subwoofer is certainly not required and not even really recommended from me. And that's the first time I've ever not recommended a subwoofer. You don't need it with this speaker. If you want to be, if you want to get down to that 20 Hertz, yes, you need a sub. Is it worth spending a few $100 to a few $1,000s to make up those last 15 Hertz in a flat, cohesive way with the speaker? I guess it's up to you. But if it's my recommendation, I would say that these are perfectly adequate, just the two towers. Speaking of the two towers, I want to talk about soundstage and imaging. And while imaging is a 10 out of 10, can't really think of anything that beats it. The sound staging is both good and bad. So the bad is that it is not as wide, like total width as some other speakers. Things like the Buchart S400s or the S300 Mark IIs will go out wider to the sides. The good of this soundstage is that it's simply just effing massive. It is just so tall and large and deep, and the quality of each sound within the depth of the soundstage just makes for a absolutely massive listening experience. And this is a combination of the bass response and the capability of the higher ranges of the speaker being able to specifically place things with that impressive imaging. So while this is very good for songs, this is also great for movies. So if you watch something like The Lord of the Rings, the music is just so exceptional. Like, the Lord of the Rings soundtrack is one of those soundtracks that I will listen to everything on. Similar to the Inception or Interstellar soundtrack, those soundtracks have the magical and awful ability of making every speaker crap out at a certain point. It can just take the best sounding, most pleasing sounding speakers and you throw them into that world and you give them enough volume and they're just gonna die. They're gonna fall apart. There's gonna be weird artifacting. They don't have the frequency capability. They don't have the dynamic range capability. They just don't have it. That is different with these. These things, again, that footing, that capability of keeping its position for everything, the proper dynamic range for everything, and having quality and individuality for all the instruments, it's got it. It's really got it all. Like I said, this is gonna be a bit of a passionate review for me. So my conclusion to this, it's kind of multifaceted here. On one hand, I've seen in the 10 months I've had this, just about every review of the SVS towers or the SVS bookshelves that I could get my hands on and reasonably watch or read. And funny thing is that these seem to be universally loved speakers. And that's interesting to me because we all come from different backgrounds. We come with different music preferences and different sound preferences. And yet this seems to somehow make its way into fitting almost everybody properly. They can come at it from a technical analysis, but the general consensus at the end seems to be, it's got some problems, it's got a lot of great, but at the end, I really enjoy it. Now, while I can't speak on everybody else's experience, the reason why I am putting my money towards this, the reason why I'm buying it, the sole reason, is because this speaker is better than I remember it being every single time I listen to it. I am reintroduced to the speaker and I am shocked at what I hear in a good way every time. They're always more impressive than I remember them being. And not to get too dramatic here, but I think if there was a device, just a single device that I would quantify as the most enlightening or most informative experience I have had, it would probably be the SVS Ultra Towers. I think that this has definitely taught me the most for comparisons, the most for the music. It's individually been responsible for the most amount of change in my audio experience. And that's why I'm purchasing them. So if you were to ask me if I thought they were worth the asking price, I'd say absolutely. Highest recommendations from me. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.